First, though, we start with the Gulf Coast meteorologist Alan Seals.
Alan, it looks like we're going to dodge most of the effects of Hurricane Ian here.
Here on the north central coast, that is the case, Gulf Coast, although there is one impact you may not have thought of. I'll show you that in a minute. What you need to know about Ian, right now it's still a Category 2. On a north-northwest track, it's going to hit Cuba tonight, maybe as a Category 3, the threat of torrential flooding, the threat of tremendous storm surge, and look how those clouds are mostly being blown to the northeast. That's the overall steering flow once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico. And what that means is the forecast we've been talking about the last several days has not changed dramatically. There are subtle changes, but right now, the Florida Peninsula, that's the main area of concern. Notice the wind speed projected to get to 140 miles an hour going into Wednesday, making it a Category 4. And the center of the storm likely striking Florida somewhere between central Florida and North Florida, taking a track northward. The overall trend, which is pretty much the same also, is if it makes an early landfall along the Florida coast on Wednesday, it could have winds of 130 miles an hour. That would be south of Tampa Bay, close to Fort Myers. But if it takes a little more of a track toward the west, toward Apalachicola, landfall wouldn't be until Friday. And either way, as it moves farther northward, it's going to lose some of its strength. It is still going to be a hurricane. And remember, a strong hurricane that weakens when it comes in, the storm surge does not weaken. That is a big concern for that part of the world. Here's a projection of the likelihood of hurricane force winds that are over 74 miles an hour. And notice the shape of that. The shape is basically northward with a slight northeast twist to it. And that means, again, here on the north central Gulf Coast, we are not in the area where we are concerned about hurricane force winds. But the west coast of Florida is. That's just one projection showing where you see the red. That would be tropical storm force winds, mostly confined to the eastern Gulf. For us offshore into Wednesday, we'll have winds that could be 20, 30, maybe up to 40 miles an hour. So surf conditions go down, rip currents go up, conditions become deadly at our beaches, but also focus on that northerly wind that we are going to get. That's the wind that's going to give us sunshine. It's also bringing in dry air. And when you get dry air and the daily cycle of temperature going up, the relative humidity goes down. Tomorrow afternoon, Wednesday afternoon, very low humidity for our area and the surrounding areas, and that means the risk of wildfires is going to increase. While we have that, to the east of us, it's going to be the risk of flash flooding. I'll walk you through the rest of this forecast in just a few minutes.
NBC 15 weather with Chief Meteorologist Alan Seals, certified most accurate forecast by Weather Rate.
Hurricane Ian is not yet in the Gulf of Mexico, but once it gets there tomorrow, Florida will be feeling the impact. In red, those are hurricane warnings. In orange, or yellow rather, those are tropical storm warnings. Orange is tropical storm warning, yellow is watch. It's so many I'm confused, but either way, you can see from North Florida all the way down to the Keys, it's either a watch or a warning for the threat of wind. And as Ian moves northward off the west coast of Florida, for the east side of the state, the wind will come in from the Atlantic. The west side, the wind will come in from the Gulf. Either way, that's going to create storm surge both sides of the state, so there are storm surge warnings, and then the threat of tornadoes is going to begin to increase in the next couple of days. For a storm that is still hundreds of miles away from Florida, it's going to hit Cuba tonight. It's presently a Category 2, maximum wind 100 miles an hour, gusting to 120, and once it crosses Cuba, where typically you expect it to weaken, it's not going to weaken. Notice the clouds, they expand out a great distance, and they also point mostly northeastward. That's a clue as to which way it's more likely to go. The winds that we always talk about, the highest wind right there in the middle where the air comes in and spirals faster, that's the core of the hurricane. That's where the strongest winds are, but it's the steering winds that are going to be pushing it. And right now, those steering winds at about 30,000 feet, once it crosses Cuba, they're going to start to turn it more northeastward than westward. And that answers the question many people have of could it go westward? The odds are teeny tiny. Right now, once it gets in the Gulf, more likely to head northeastward. And it's a pretty complicated process to generate a forecast like that based on the steering wind. Here's the wind speed projected. Tuesday, 130. Wednesday, before sunrise, 140. And then slowing down the forward speed as it gets closer to the west coast of Florida. Notice, though, the wind projection also forecast to go from a Category 4 back down to a 3 to a 2, but it's going to depend on whether it hits the lower west coast of Florida, or the upper coast, closer to the Big Bend, Apalachicola. Big difference there. For us in the NBC 15 area, it's not a big difference. We're still on the quiet side of what should be a storm that passes to our east, dumping rain across Florida, easily 5, 10, maybe 12 inches. Notice offshore, it could be 10 to 20 inches, and that could also shift onshore. So flooding rain, hurricane-force winds, tornadoes, and storm surge, all things that state has to be prepared for. Locally, we're in the mid-80s. A north wind, look at the humidity, look at the dew point. Both of those are going to be falling tomorrow, and that's going to be a big deal after we get a few sprinkles and showers this evening. Look for a rainbow if you're south of I-10 along the coastline in Mobile and Jackson counties. We'll get the sunshine tomorrow, and as pleasant as this looks, what it doesn't show you, in fact, you could erase that 10%. What it doesn't show you is the dry air that's coming in. We'll see our temperatures much more reasonable, mid-70s inland, lower 80s along the I-10 corridor. Tomorrow night, look forward to 50s inland, lower 60s near the coast. But in between, here's the problem. That north wind will pick up, not just because of Ian, because of the north wind that we are naturally going to have. Humidity falls and the threat of wildfires picks up. Avoid burning the next 2 days because the afternoons will be very low humidity. There's your 7-day tracker. Otherwise sunny and dry. We could get some rain Friday, partially from Ian.